I attended a briefing at Amnesty International with their researchers who went to Gaza to investigate which weapons were used. And I asked them a similar question, and if I remember correctly, their answer was they didn't find any evidence of DU, but they didn't rule it out either. Now, someone mentioned before, are the laws different for Israel in terms of how these weapons are supposed to be used? And actually, they're not. Any government that either buys or receives U.S. weapons is subject to the terms of the Arms Export Control Act, which should set strict limitations on how these weapons are used. They're to be used for two purposes only: for internal security or for legitimate self-defense. And in the case of Israel's military occupation of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza Strip, these conditions are being violated for both of them. It's not internal security because they're not being used inside of Israel's borders. They're being used in a foreign military occupation. And when these weapons are used to target civilians and to destroy civilian infrastructure and to cause thousands of deaths of civilians, they're definitely not being used in a legitimate way because it's never legitimate to target civilians under international law. Also, the Foreign Assistance Act is useful to keep in mind. This has an even more categorical provision against U.S. military or economic aid being used to commit human rights abuses. And it says that any country that engages in a gross pattern of systematic violations of human rights shall not be eligible for any form of U.S. aid. And then finally, there's the Leahy Law, which I put in quotations because it's not a permanent law, but it's something that gets renewed every year in the budget. And the Leahy Law is a very good provision that says that any particular unit of a military which has committed human rights abuse cannot be eligible for U.S. assistance. So these are the very strict and stringent conditions that we have on how U.S. weapons are supposed to be used. It's definitely a political struggle to get them applied in the case of Israel and in other cases as well, which is where you all can come in, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. Now, this is a presentation we put together for members of Congress when we did this on Capitol Hill earlier this year. And we did some policy recommendations. And I want to stress number two, because during the Bush administration, there was never one single investigation by the State Department into Israel's violations of the Arms Export Control Act, even though, as I went through in this presentation, U.S. weapons were responsible for the deaths of more than 3,000 innocent Palestinian civilians during that time. The State Department has never investigated and has never told Congress that there has been a violation of this law, although after the war on Lebanon in 2006, and I didn't include those statistics in here, but you can count about another 1,000 Lebanese civilians who died with U.S. weapons at the hands of Israel during this time. After the war on Lebanon, the State Department said that Israel may have violated this law, but never made a final determination. So it's up to us, and this is really the crux of my presentation, it's really up to us as civil society to try to hold our government responsible and accountable to these laws when they failed to do so up until now. And folks can flip back on the lights if they want, because I'm done with the PowerPoint. It's really up to us to let our members of Congress and the Obama administration and the State Department know that we know what these laws are and that we want the United States to follow these laws when it comes to weapons that go not only to Israel, but to every country, for that matter. So we have a long-standing campaign to challenge military aid to Israel. I think the postcards and the stickers have been circulated. Feel free to take as many of these postcards as you have a use for back home with your VFP chapter. I'm also going to send around some sign-up sheets, and if you'd like to help us with this campaign to challenge military aid to Israel, please do sign up, and what we'll do is we'll then send you an organizing packet that has a whole bunch of these postcards and petitions to members of Congress and stickers and fact sheets and so forth. Really everything you'll need to go out into your community and educate people about this very crucial foreign policy issue and build up momentum for a national campaign to try to hold our politicians accountable to these laws which they themselves passed.